What's the first thing that comes to mind when you think of World War I? For most of us, it's trenches, right? Mud, a brutal stalemate. But what if I told you that's just a tiny piece of a much, much bigger story? Today, we're going to pull back the curtain on the hidden fronts of WWI, the battles you probably never learned about in school.
Just try to imagine it. The constant roar of artillery, the chaos of this new kind of industrial warfare. And yet, right in the middle of it all, an American soldier, Quincy Claude Ayres, takes a moment to write this down. It's kind of beautiful, right? A really powerful reminder that life, in these small ways, just kept going, even in the face of total destruction.
So Ayres could still hear the birds. But what about all the other stories that got completely drowned out by the noise of war? Well, that's what we're here to do. We're going to try and listen for those silenced stories, the forgotten battles, the invisible enemies, and the huge revolutionary changes that happen far, far away from those familiar front lines.
All right, let's jump right in. First up, we need to basically tear up our mental map of this war, because it wasn't just some line in the mud in France, not even close.
Yeah, this is the picture we all have in our heads, right? The Western Front. It was this insane 370-mile scar of trenches stretching from the English Channel all the way to Switzerland. I mean, just a landscape of craters and barbed wire. And for years, it was just stuck in this horrific, grinding stalemate.
But here's the thing. While everyone was fixated on that one line, a massive war was raging all over the planet. We're talking from the deserts of the Middle East to the jungles of Africa. This was the first truly global war. And get this, for the first time ever, the fighting wasn't just on land. It was happening at sea with these new things called submarines, and even, unbelievably, up in the air with airplanes.
Okay, so when you have a war on this scale, millions of soldiers scattered across continents, you run into a brand new kind of problem. A whole new battlefield, really. And this one wasn't fought with guns. It was fought with supply chains. No one had ever faced this question before. How on earth do you keep an army that big supplied?
You know, it's easy to think about the bullets, but this was a war of beans and bandages too. Just feeding, arming, and moving millions of guys was an absolute logistical nightmare. The old ways, they just weren't going to cut it. This new war machine needed a totally new kind of fuel. Okay, let's break this down, because this is fascinating. Forever, armies ran on horsepower, literally. But just look at these numbers. A horse can go maybe 60 miles a day, flat out. A truck, 300 miles on one tank of gas. A horse has to eat all the time, even when it's just standing there. A truck uses zero fuel when it's parked. But here's the real kicker. You can build a truck in a factory in just a few hours. It takes years to breed and train a warhorse.
So what's the takeaway here? World War I basically proved that you couldn't run a modern army on hay and oats anymore. The war pushed the horse to its absolute limit, and that forced this massive shift to oil and engines. This moment right here, this is pretty much the birth of the modern oil-powered military we still have today.
So we have this brand new mechanized war, but the soldiers fighting it were up against more than just bullets and shells. In fact, some of their deadliest enemies were totally invisible, attacking them from the inside. Just look at this number for a second. 63,114. That's how many U.S. soldiers were killed by disease. And that's compared to about 53,000 killed in battle. Let that sink in. Your biggest threat as a soldier wasn't an enemy machine gun. It was a virus you couldn't even see. And the main culprit was the infamous 1918 flu pandemic. I mean, imagine being one of America's top doctors, a guy named William Welch. He does an autopsy on a soldier who died from this flu, and he's just horrified. He says it's like nothing he's ever seen, a new kind of plague. The soldier's lungs were blue, swollen, just destroyed. The doctors were completely powerless. This flu just tore through the crowded army camps and troop ships. At the absolute peak of the war, it took down more than a quarter of the entire U.S. Army. That's over 1 million men. It completely clogged up the transport lines and crippled one of the biggest American offensives of the war. Entire units were just wiped out, not by bullets, but by the flu.
So you've got this physical plague raging, but at the same time, there was a mental one spreading too. They came up with a new name for it, shell shock. It was their way of describing the horrifying psychological damage from the nonstop stress of this new kind of war. You couldn't see this wound, but believe me, it was just as devastating as any bullet.
Okay, so what did they do with these soldiers? This is where it gets really telling. You'd think the goal of treatment would be to get them better and back to the fight. But look at these numbers from a 1917 study. A big chunk, about 35%, got sent to camps. Another 20% went to other hospitals or were given jobs at the base. But here's the number that blows my mind. Look at the bottom. Only 16.9%, less than 1 in 5, actually went back to combat.
So what does that tell you? The system was never really about healing people. It was about managing manpower. Treatment was just a way to relabel a soldier from frontline fighter to support staff, so the big machine could keep on running. It was a cold, logistical solution to a deeply, deeply human problem. So all of these huge changes on the battlefield, they were causing just as big of an earthquake back on the home front. As this giant war machine demanded more and more from its soldiers, it started demanding more from civilians too. And it ended up changing society forever. And this chart shows one of the biggest changes of all. Think about it. With millions of men gone, who is going to keep the factories and farms running? In Great Britain alone, look at that jump. Almost 1.5 million more women entered the workforce in just 3 years. And we're not just talking about traditional jobs here. No way. Women were stepping into roles that would have been completely unthinkable just a few years earlier. They were becoming ammunition testers, airplane mechanics, ambulance and truck drivers. In the U.S. Navy, thousands enlisted as yeomen, working as radio operators. And you had these incredible bilingual women serving near the front lines in France as telephone operators. They called them the Hello Girls. The activist Alice Dunbar Nelson put it perfectly back in 1918. She said women went into every kind of factory. Their work wasn't some minor side story. It was absolutely essential. Let's be clear, the war could not have been fought without them. This was a revolution, a complete upheaval of gender roles, and it was happening all over the world. So the fighting finally stops in November 1918, but that didn't mean the war was over. Not really. Its impact, its consequences, they would continue to echo for decades to come. This timeline really lays out the chain reaction. The war ends in 1918, and by 1919, 4, count them, 4, massive empires that had been around for centuries are just gone. The German, the Russian, the Austro-Hungarian, and the Ottoman empires all collapsed. And the peace treaty that was supposed to fix everything, the Treaty of Versailles, it just created a whole new set of problems that boiled under the surface for 20 years and then exploded into World War II. I mean, the great tragic irony is that this was called the war to end all wars. And it did the exact opposite. All of its unresolved problems, all the new technology, the new borders drawn on the map, it all just set the stage for an even bigger, even deadlier war just 2 decades later. And that really leaves us with one big question, doesn't it? When you think about it, from our total reliance on oil to how we think about psychological trauma, the echoes of these hidden fronts are still all around us today. So over a century later, are we still living in the world that the First World War built? And are we, in some ways, still fighting its hidden battles?